Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Protesters in Jordan demand the downfall of the Wadi Araba peace treaty. In Syria, activists vow to continue until the regime is brought down. And thousands of Iraqis decry government corruption and poor public services. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
We
now look at developments in Libya and begin with Al Jazeera's exclusive video of the heated battles in Bani Walid. The February 17th revolutionaries are launching attacks on Gaddafi's battalions stationed in the city. Our Al Jazeera correspondent spoke of the strong resistance by the battalions.
The battalions are massing near the Wadi Zaytun neighbourhood on the hill. They are spreading oil on the roads to hamper the revolutionaries' advance, but the revolutionaries have fended off the attacks against them to hinder their push. They are advancing from two directions, from the right and left. The revolutionaries are facing strong resistance by Gaddafi's battalions. One of Gaddafi's close personal staff may be taking refuge here. The battalions are firing mortar shells to counter the revolutionaries' attack. These pictures show the fierce clashes and violent confrontations. Revolutionaries insist on advancing and taking control of Bani Walid.
In another development, a field commander in Sirte said that revolutionaries control 70% of the city, which is considered a stronghold for Muammar al-Gaddafi and his tribe.
Bani Walid في أيدي الثوار.
Bani Walid is in the hands of the revolutionaries. 2 days after the given deadline for the city to surrender, reinforcement was summoned from all directions, despite the hundreds of armed Gaddafi supporters entrenched in the city. After raising signs of victory, the revolutionaries are combing Bani Walid to secure it. The scene is not very different in Sirte. The revolutionaries are mobilizing their forces to secure Gaddafi's stronghold, which was a central front for seesaw battles before most of the city fell into the hands of the revolutionaries.
Thank God, for 3 days the revolutionaries fought in Sirte, and yesterday 70% or 80% of the city was liberated, God willing.
Meanwhile, the civilians are trying to leave Sirte to escape the fighting and tragic conditions inside the city.
It is extremely bad. I mean, the hospitals have no medicine, and the humanitarian situation is very bad. There is no electricity, no water, and no gas. The city's residents are suffering a lot. For 3 months, the city has been under siege by the battalions of the tyrant Gaddafi.
So in Sirte, as well as in Bani Walid, decisive battles are ongoing in the Libyan revolution, expected to soon be completed after months of fighting and destruction.
قال رئيس الوزراء التركي رجب طيب أردوغان إن المسؤولين عما وصفه بالقمع الذي يتعرض
Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan said those responsible for what he described as the oppression of the Syrian people will not survive with impunity. Erdogan made the statement during a visit to Libya, revealing an apparent escalation in Turkey's tone towards the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Erdogan arrived in Libya earlier today within the framework of his North African tour, during which he also visited Egypt and Tunisia. His visit to Libya comes one day after British Prime Minister David Cameron and French President Nicolas Sarkozy visited the country. In Syria, at least 20 people were killed by the gunfire of security forces in various regions on the Friday of perseverance until the downfall of the regime, which witnessed protests across the country.
In the Syrian capital, Damascus, it was announced that dialogue sessions will continue in the provinces and that a consensus was reached on what was called reviewing the economic model and strengthening communication with the youth. Also in Damascus, Syrian TV is broadcasting live from a number of regions, including the city of Aleppo, to deny what it refers to as the seditious satellite networks, reports on the demonstrations. In Damascus, guests on Syrian TV hold the U.S. and Israel responsible for dividing people in the entire Arab region, and not only in Syria.
We have discovered that among the sheikhs, some are working for the White House, and that among our muftis, some are working for Israel's Mossad.
However, not very far from Syrian TV headquarters in Al-Umayyin Square in the capital, mobile phones recorded these scenes. In the Asali neighborhood of Damascus, in Al-Qaboun neighborhood, in Al-Madan, and in the suburb of Saqba. The protests were not limited to Damascus and its suburbs, but spread to most Syrian regions. In Homs, Idlib, the city of Jassim in Horan, the village of Nahita in Horan as well, and the Muda of al-Hasaka. A funeral is held for a person killed by the security's gunfire in Khatab village in the countryside of Hama, while the opposition said the Syrian army and security forces deployed thousands of members to the city. The reports of security deployments and arrest campaigns also continue. People of different political backgrounds, ages, and social positions are arrested. Dr. Rafa Rashid is a Syrian psychologist cooped up in a women's prison in Damascus. According to the opposition, she is one of the thousands of men and women detainees kept behind bars without a trial. Friday's protests were named by activists the Friday of Perseverance until the downfall of the regime, which witnessed the killing of a number of people by the security forces' gunfire. Syrian state media denied the reports, saying only one security member was killed by the gunfire of militants.
We followed many stories, works of fiction, and statements on a number of satellite networks. But now, as promised, we present a video of Hussein Harmoush.
My name is Hussein Mustafa Harmoush. At the beginning of 2009, I was granted the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, and then I joined a security course for 1 year at the National Institute for Security Sciences. The course ended on May 3rd. On June 6th, I announced my defection from the Syrian Arab Army.
Did you complete the course?
No.
How many times were you reprimanded and for what reasons?
I was reprimanded twice in the 5th Brigade and another time in the Field Engineering faculty when I was the commander of a battalion.
Why did you flee?
I fled because of the bloody events witnessed on the streets.
What does bloody mean?
I mean, there were many people killed in the street.
Who was killing these civilians?
There were gangs.
Armed gangs?
Certainly armed gangs. They were killing these civilians.
Did you receive orders to open fire on any civilian?
No, I was not given any orders to open fire on any civilians or even non-civilians.
Did you see any commander giving orders to their subordinates to open fire on civilians?
No, I did not see any.
Lieutenant Colonel Hussein, who issued the orders to kill the protesters?
The orders were issued from the security and military institutions.
After you fled the army, who contacted you?
كثيرون ما انتصروا وكله من المعارضة الخارجية.
Many people contacted me, all of them from the opposition abroad. But after about 2.5 or 3 months, I discovered that most of the people who contacted me or encouraged me had their own agendas and promised me many things.
Like what?
Mostly support, all kinds of support, material, logistical, weapons, etc. But none of these promises were delivered.
Weapons for what?
The plan was to secure weapons to protect unarmed civilians, but nothing was provided, neither weapons nor anything else.
In order to open fire on the army and security?
No, I said in my statement, even if I was killed by a soldier, I would not kill him.
Tens of thousands of Yemenis have staged rallies in the capital Sana'a and other major cities after Friday prayers. The protesters have been calling for the complete ouster of Ali Abdullah Saleh's regime. This comes a day after the regime forces opened fire on demonstrators in Taiz, killing 10 people. Huge crowds in the southern city marched from the Tahrir, or Change Square, to the Directorate of Security. Hundreds of people have been killed in government crackdowns since the Arab Spring started in the country. The latest now from Bahrain. We're just getting in this breaking news. Another Bahraini protester being killed after inhaling tear gas. Now in Bahrain, tens of thousands of anti-regime protesters around the capital, Manama, are holding mass funerals for an anti-regime protester who was killed on Wednesday. People from all walks of life have come out to the streets right after Friday prayers to take part in the funeral processions. The funeral is being held for Syed Jawad Hashem. He was killed on Wednesday night while out protesting against the regime. He died after inhaling tear gas fired by regime forces. The incident happened in the town of Sirte. He is the Bahrain crackdown's latest victim. Earlier on Friday, Saudi-backed forces attacked anti-regime protesters in several villages and towns around the capital, Manama. Activists say that several protesters have been injured. Since mid-February, Saudi-backed forces have killed dozens of anti-regime demonstrators. And again, the latest news coming in from Bahrain saying that one protester, a new victim that is, has been added to those who've been killed in the latest wave of protests. Meanwhile, Bahrain's top cleric says the ruling family is treating anti-regime protesters as enemies of the state. Sheikh Isa Qasem has said that police brutality is not helping the current crisis in Bahrain. He also underlined the regime in Manama must answer the calls of the demonstrators. The cleric made the comments during his Friday prayer sermon. It was attended by thousands of people. Activists in Saudi Arabia say a popular movement toward political reform is needed to avert a looming crisis in the country. The Muslim Nation Party says the kingdom's unwarranted arrests, human rights violations and wasting of public funds for suspicious arms deals are just some of the factors that have thrown the nation into a crisis. The group says political, economic and social reform policies are needed to resolve the current situation. Other activists have also called on Riyadh to implement changes and soon. Rejecting the ruling monarchy's claims of political reform, a prominent political activist, Dr. Mohammed Saeed Tayyib, says the government must make serious reforms if it wants to prevent the outbreak of a popular uprising like the ones in some other Arab countries.
Egyptians gathered in Tahrir, or Liberation Square, to take part in a Friday rally dubbed No to the Emergency Law. The rally was organized by nearly 30 political movements and parties, most notably the Revolutionary Youth Union and the New Al-Ghad, or Tomorrow Party. However, a number of political parties, including the Justice and Freedom Party and the April 6th Youth Movement, decided to boycott the rally.
The protesters are calling for the revocation of Egypt's emergency law and for the application of civil law to all citizens without exception. In response, the health ministry deployed 33 ambulances to the square and elevated the state of alert at nearby hospitals.
Egyptian revolutionaries were divided over today's events in Tahrir Square, where a rally dubbed No to the Emergency Law was organised by nearly 30 political movements and coalitions. On the other hand, several other political blocs, most notably the Muslim Brotherhood, decided to boycott today's rally. The participants held a large banner that read, No to the Emergency Law. Other protesters raised slogans calling for the revocation of the emergency law and for the application of civil law to all citizens without exception.
We say no to the emergency law and no to military trials. We call for the retrials of the 11,899 defendants in civil court. If any one of them is found guilty or proven to be a thug, we want the Honorable Field Marshal to put them in jail. But please take note that many of them are revolutionary youths who are demanding freedom, justice, and democracy, a decent life, and dignity.
We don't want this emergency law. We would die for freedom, dignity, and social justice. This is why we came out here today. We didn't come out here to break, vandalize, or destroy anything.
The emergency law is the biggest hurdle on the road to development in Egypt. How do you expect an investor to come here and invest if an emergency law is in effect? It's impossible.
Despite their small number, the participants of today's rally, dubbed Friday of No to the Emergency Law, expressed unity and support for the armed forces and urged them to restore security and stability to the country.
This emergency law must be overturned. It's against the revolution, the martyrs, and the injured who remain in the hospital.
What did this law do to benefit Egypt over the past 30 years? If anything, it destroyed the public and private sectors. It ruined Egypt. People were afraid to speak out under the pretext of this emergency law.
The participants in today's protest voiced their rejection to the emergency law. Meanwhile, several other political blocs, who also voiced their rejection to the emergency law, decided to boycott today's rally, saying it's not the right time to protest.
Jordanians in the capital Amman's district of Rabia protested, demanding the cancellation of the peace treaty with the Israeli entity. The demonstrators tried to break the security cordon surrounding the Israeli embassy after clashing with security forces.
في زمن الصحوات الإسلامية تولد الحقيقة وتتوهج إرادة الشعوب.
In the season of Islamic awakening, truth is born and the people's will shines to change the headlines. And of course, among those issues are the relations between the Israeli occupation entity and some Arab regimes. The beginning was similar in Cairo, the birth of a new Islamic awakening from the womb of current events and political repression. Then the liberation of Egypt's sky from the Israeli flag began. And from Cairo to Amman, Jordan's capital, popular will was uninterrupted as the roar of popular anger reverberated to demand the departure of the occupation's ambassador from Jordan. The protests that started with the demand for change transformed Amman's streets into a platform to call for liberation, the liberation of the homeland from the presence of the Israeli occupation entity's embassy. Jordanians had a date with the revolution and intended to define their true goal.
ومع بوصلة تحديد الهدف الحقيقي.
The Jordanian people came to demand an end to the Wadi Araba Treaty. They came to demand an end to the relations between the Jordanian government and the Zionist entity. The masses are leading this demand, and we confirm our right to resist the occupation and our right to remove the enemy from our land. We have the right to reject its embassy and reject all diplomatic, economic and cultural ties with it.
تظاهرات رسمت ملامح المرحلة بعناوينها الكبرى وبأبعادها المستقبلية.
The demonstrations illustrated the features of this season and highlighted its headlines and eventual implications. The protests in the Al-Rabia area in the capital Amman resulted from genuine pain. The protesters chanted for the cancellation of the peace treaty with the Israeli entity, known as the Wadi Araba, and called for an end to ties with the entity. They also demanded its ambassador be expelled and an end to the normalization policy. Angry demonstrators chanted for the death of Israel and the U.S. In addition, they burned the Israeli flag. Some protesters tried to break the security cordon surrounding the Israeli embassy and breached the checkpoints, but the heavily deployed security forces prevented the protesters, igniting sporadic clashes. The number of demonstrators grew after evening prayers when worshippers left the Kaluti Mosque located near Tel Aviv's embassy.
Thousands of Iraqis protested after Friday prayers in the city of Sadr, east of the capital Baghdad, in response to the call by Sadrist movement leader Muqtada Sadr. The demonstrators held government officials responsible for the deterioration of services and demanded the legislative body hold those responsible accountable. In addition, other cities witnessed similar protests.
In response to the call of Sadrist movement leader Muqtada al-Sadr, thousands of Iraqis protested in the center of the capital Baghdad. They held some government factions responsible for the deterioration of the government's work and its shortcomings in providing basic services to the citizens.
These people are in murky waters. If Iyad Alawi and the Iraqia bloc wanted to reform the government, they would have had their supporters on the street. They had 90 seats. They would have come to Tahrir Square and to the offices of the martyr the way our brothers protested in al-Sadr city.
Politicians who participated in the demonstrations confirmed that the continued slow pace of implementing government programs and promises will negatively reflect on the street that now demands accountability for the negligent and corrupt, holding important posts in the government and parliament. Those officials are playing negative roles and ignoring essential issues in the country.
With the ongoing diplomatic efforts to offset the Palestinian bid for recognition of statehood at the United Nations next week, including a discussion over a new European Union proposal by Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas today with EU and United States envoys. More in this report from IBA's Ellie Wogelenter.
A report in today's Al Hayat newspaper details a softened Palestinian proposal in the draft they plan on submitting to the UN Security Council, which the Palestinians announced yesterday. The proposal that Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is discussing with officials from the European Union and the United States includes 20 paragraphs, of which 4 have been agreed upon, according to the report. The first paragraph calls for a renewal of negotiations for a minimum of 6 months, followed by an end to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the establishment of a Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders. The second paragraph, upon which there is agreement, calls for Israel to stop implementing unilateral actions regarding settlements in exchange for Palestinians fulfilling their security obligations. Among the paragraphs which have yet to be agreed upon are references to a declaration of independence in 1988, rulings by the International Criminal Court on the status of the West Bank and the security barrier, and a confirmation of the right of the Palestinians to self-determination. The United States continues to insist that any bid for statehood at the UN will be counterproductive.
The Palestinians will not and cannot achieve statehood through a declaration at the United Nations. It is a distraction, and in fact, it's counterproductive. That remains our position. We continue to be focused with great intensity on the need to get Israelis and Palestinians together again in direct negotiations, because that is the path towards a two-state solution and Palestinian statehood.
Meanwhile, talks continue with officials in the region, including Catherine Ashton, the European Union's foreign policy chief. Netanyahu reportedly told Ashton that Israel would agree to upgrade the Palestinian Authority's status at the United Nations as long as it is not declared a state. Other officials in the region include U.S. envoys Dennis Ross and David Hale. The State Department spokesman said yesterday that they would continue their meetings in the coming days.
Yesterday they met with, as you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu as well as Defense Minister Erupt. They're also consulting closely with the other quartet envoys who are in the region, and those meetings were described to me as constructive and reflecting the quartet's ongoing determination to get the parties back to the negotiating table. Again, moving forward, they're going to remain in touch, they being David Hale and Dennis Ross, as well as the other quartet envoys, are going to meet again in New York on Sunday and remain in touch throughout the day today and tomorrow and Saturday, of course.
And quartet envoy Tony Blair is in the region pushing his own proposal, whereby the Palestinians would deposit their draft resolution with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who himself would bring it to the General Assembly by the end of the current session that runs until December 28th, if negotiations were not renewed. The idea is to allow for more time and possibly enabling both sides to continue working with the international community for a formula that would enable a return to negotiations. Ellie Wogelanter, IBA News.
Hundreds of people rallied on behalf of the Palestinian people in New York ahead of their drive for full UN membership. Beginning in Times Square, demonstrators then marched through Midtown Manhattan, where they stopped traffic and drew support from several passers-by before carrying on to the United Nations headquarters. The activists belong to various groups, including the Jewish Voice for Peace.
Our message here is whatever the solution is, whatever the outcome is, that Palestinian human rights and healthy civil society have to be a part of it and can't be sacrificed.
I feel like it's my duty to be out here today because obviously the Palestinians don't have as much of a voice to speak for themselves as we do for them.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.